So Devyani ma'am, last 5 days are remaining for the UPSC Prelims 2025 examination. Tell us what are the biggest 5 mistakes that the students commit in this last days before the examination, which in many students' case even costs them their attempt.
First mistake that students commonly make in those last 5 days before the exam is not being able to simulate the exam slots in their practice or in their study, which leads to reduced alertness. Now imagine that you're somebody who's used to eating at certain times. In any case, this is recommended, right? All doctors will recommend to you that you should have fixed times for eating. So if you are eating your breakfast, your lunch, your dinner at certain fixed slots, and then on one fine day you decide that today I'm going to eat at a different time, either you will not be feeling that hungry, or even if you end up eating, it will not be that comfortable for you. You might feel a little bit of discomfort in the best case scenario. And in the worst case scenario, it could also cause a stomach upset. Why? Because your digestive system is primed, is trained to give its optimum performance at certain slots that you have made it used to, right? Now, something similar could happen if you are doing your practice questions, your PYQ questions at any random times during the day. The best thing to do is to practice your questions in the actual exam slots. So from 9:30 to 11:30, you should be practicing your GS questions. And from 2:30 to 4:30 in the afternoon, you should be practicing your CSAT questions, because those are the actual exam slots. So you will spend these 5 days training your brain, sort of priming your brain to perform at those particular time slots. What that does is it makes you more alert on the day of the exam. It enables you to recall things better simply because you're in a habit of performing in those particular time slots. So that will make things easier for you in the exam hall. Otherwise, just like a stomach upset, it could cause a cognitive upset for you. Now, getting to the second mistake that students commonly make in these last few days is when there is a disparity between the exam hall conditions and the conditions that you are studying or practicing in. So imagine that you're supposed to go on a trek and you're practicing on your treadmill in your living room. Now you may be physically trained to go for that trek, but the environmental conditions might shock you. For example, if you're going for that trek, the weather conditions might not be suitable. It might be too hot, it might be too humid, the ground might be too uneven, it might be too slippery, and you've not practiced for any of that, and that impairs your performance, right? So something similar can happen when you end up practicing, studying in a situation where you're very comfortable. So you have your ACs on, you have your fan running at the maximum, you are simply sitting on your sofa very comfortably, studying, practicing MCQs in your bed. If you're doing that during your study time, during your practice time, then it will make things very difficult for you in the exam hall, because oftentimes the conditions are not that comfortable in the exam hall. You might end up with uncomfortable seats. The fans might not be running at their maximum speed. Sometimes the fans are not even working. You might be in a situation where your desk is kind of, rickety and not really steady. All of those things will irritate you. It will make you uncomfortable in the first 5, 10, 15 minutes. And that is precious time. So to avoid going into that state of environmental shock where you're not able to deal with the environmental conditions, it is best to practice it is best to practice and study in a situation which is very similar to the exam hall. Also, this is something that will aid your memory. So what happens is your memory is something that is enhanced when you study or practice in an environment that is similar to the environment of performance. अगर आप वैसी ही सिचुएशन में पढ़ाई करोगे, प्रैक्टिस करोगे, तो जब आप एग्जाम हॉल में होगे, योर मेमोरी विल बी बेटर. दैट मीन्स यू विल बी एबल टू रिकॉल थिंग्स बेटर. चाहे वो फैक्ट्स हो, चाहे वो कॉन्सेप्ट्स हो, एवरीथिंग विल कम टू यू इन अ मोर इजी वे, सिंपली बिकॉज वो उसी सिचुएशन में आपकी मेमोरी में गया है. So this is something that you should be doing to enhance your performance. So the third mistake is avoiding difficult topics. Imagine that you have to go swimming and you're constantly scared of going into the deep end of the pool and you constantly avoid it. But on the day of the actual performance, you are in a situation where you absolutely have to go to the deep end. What happens? You immediately panic because you've not practiced for it, right? And that lowers your confidence, that impairs your performance. That is exactly what happens with students when they are uncomfortable with certain subjects. I understand that certain things are difficult. For example, किसी के लिए economics difficult हो सकता है, किसी के लिए history के facts याद करना difficult हो सकता है. It is very easy to avoid these difficult topics in the last few days before the exam. But I would not suggest doing that. Why? Because it's a good idea to sort of prime yourself a little bit for these difficult topics, even if you're devoting 15 minutes for these topics. I, for example, used to find Buddhism and Jainism very difficult to remember, but I still did not avoid it completely. Why? Because that would make me anxious. What happens is कि एग्जाम हॉल में कभी कभी ऐसा होता है कि हम अगर सोच के भी जाते हैं कि this is difficult and I will try to avoid these questions, you might be required to do those questions, and then it will become very stressful for you. So even if you're devoting 15 minutes to those topics that you find difficult, even if you're doing 3 MCQs, 4 MCQs, 5 MCQs of those topics, what happens is, number one, you get at least reasonably comfortable with those topics. At least they don't send you in a state of panic. Number two, you may not be able to handle difficult questions from your weak areas. That is understandable. But at least you will be able to grab some low-hanging fruits if you have sort of exposed yourself to those topics on some primitive level. थोड़ा बहुत ही अगर expose किया है आपने उन topics को, चाहे आपने उसकी पढ़ाई करी है, चाहे आपने उसके MCQs करे हैं, at least the very easy questions you will be able to do, and that will only add to your score. The fourth mistake is accumulating sleep debt. So it's understandable that it is the last few days before the exam, and you might be feeling that revision is more important than anything else. But imagine that you have to take an important call, and instead of putting your phone in charge, you immediately take that call, and your phone dies right in the middle of the call. Was it worth it? No. The thing is that when you put your phone on charge, it is something that is going to allow that phone to work at its optimum level, right? That is exactly what sleep is. It is an asset. It is not a liability. So if you are somebody who's trying to sleep for 4 to 5 hours a day these days, trying to put in that extra bit of revision just to get an edge, I would not recommend that. You should still be getting your 7 to 8 hours of sleep, because when you are in a state of sleep debt, your judgment is impaired by 30 to 40%. Now, what is sleep debt? The thing with sleep is, when you are sleep deprived, suppose आज आपकी नींद पूरी नहीं हुई, that does not mean that your sleep will evaporate. No, it will still be carried forward to the next day. आपको अगले दिन वो नींद आ रही होगी. You will need to compensate for that lack of sleep. If you go to the exam hall in a state of sleep deprivation, like I said, your judgment is impaired by 30 to 40%, and your accuracy will drop. It is simply not worth sacrificing your sleep for, right? It's a good trade-off to devote 7 to 8 hours to sleep, just so that you can perform at your optimum level, just so you avoid making any silly mistakes. Even if you're able to squeeze in 2 or 3 hours of extra revision by compromising on your sleep, at the end of the day, the sleep deprivation will lead to errors, even with areas that you were good at. So it's simply not worth it. The last mistake that students could be commonly making is that of ignoring triggers, simply assuming that you will be able to stay calm in the exam hall. That normally does not work. Let me give you an example. If you bought a fire extinguisher और आपने उसे अपने घर में लटका दिया, and there's a fire and you've never used it before, will you be able to use it very quickly? No. अगर आग लग जाएगी और आप तब पहली बार ट्राई कर रहे हो उस फायर एक्सटिंग्विशर को यूज करना, you will not be able to figure it out that quickly. You will end up wasting some precious time. That is exactly what happens with your parasympathetic nervous system, which is responsible for panic and relaxation. So what happens here is कि अगर आप panic mode में जा रहे हो exam hall में for whatever reasons, of course, I hope that you all have a good experience in the exam hall. But in case you end up being in a situation where you're getting very nervous, where you're getting very panicky, you might end up making a lot of silly mistakes, right? And if you think that you will be able to calm yourself down in that moment, it will be very difficult. It is something that you need to practice beforehand so that it comes to you more easily on the day of the exam. Something that you can do to practice that relaxation is called box breathing. It's a technique that is used by defense personnel in a lot of countries to be able to manage their battlefield stress. Now, it's very easy to remember. Imagine a box which has equal sides. That is the property of a square, right? All the sides are equal. So here we have 4 steps, just like 4 sides of the square. And each step is of equal duration. Each step is 4 seconds. So you breathe in for 4 seconds. You hold it for 4 seconds. You breathe out for another 4 seconds. And then you pause for another 4 seconds. You do this repeatedly for 4 to 5 minutes a day. I know that it is very hectic these days, but 4 to 5 minutes is negligible, and it is worth a good state of relaxation in the exam hall, because when you're relaxed, when your mind is calm, there is automatically more mental clarity, which will enhance your memory, it will enhance your attention, it will enhance your decision making. So let's actually do this box breathing technique. Breathe in for 4 seconds. Hold it for 4 seconds. You exhale with a whoosh again for 4 seconds. And then you pause for another 4 seconds.
So guys, thanks for sticking till the very end. Devani ma'am will soon come with another video on actual exam day strategy. So stay hooked.